He stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror of the Seoul International Science Center. His black suit was perfectly pressed, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. In just 30 minutes, he would give the most important presentation of his life, not just to human scientists, but to aliens who had mastered space travel. "You can do this," he whispered to himself, straightening his tie for the 10th time. At 28 years old, he was the youngest quantum mechanics researcher chosen to present at this historic conference. The weight of representing humanity felt heavy on his shoulders. The bathroom door squeaked open, and his research partner, Jia, poked her head in. Her lab coat was slightly wrinkled, and her short black hair was held back by colorful clips that didn't quite match the serious atmosphere of the conference. "He-jun, what are you doing hiding in here? The Lyrians have arrived." Her eyes were wide with excitement. "You won't believe how they look." He-jun took a deep breath and followed Jia into the crowded hallway. The air buzzed with whispers and gasps. Through the sea of humans in suits and lab coats, he caught his first glimpse of the alien delegates. The Lyrians were tall, at least 7 feet, with skin that shimmered in different shades of blue. Their eyes were large and silver, seeming to catch every detail around them. But what struck He-jun most was how human-like they appeared despite their alien features. They walked on 2 legs and wore what looked like formal robes made of a material that rippled like water. Among them stood one figure who immediately caught his attention. She was slightly shorter than the others, but carried herself with an air of authority that made everyone around her step back. Her skin was a deeper blue than her companions, and her silver eyes seemed to glow with intelligence. "That's Ambassador Era," Jia whispered. "She's their leading expert in quantum mechanics. They say she's been studying it for over 200 years. He-jun's mouth went dry. 200 years of experience versus his mere 6 years of research. Maybe he should have declined this opportunity. Maybe. "Welcome, Earth scientists." Era's voice rang out, clear and musical. "We look forward to learning about your progress in understanding the universe." Was it his imagination, or did her lips curl slightly when she said progress? The conference hall filled quickly. He-jun found himself seated near the front, his presentation notes clutched tightly in his hands. Speaker after speaker took the stage, sharing Earth's latest discoveries. Each time, the Lyrians listened politely, but their expressions grew increasingly amused. Finally, it was his turn. He-jun walked to the podium, trying to keep his legs steady. The holographic display behind him came to life, showing his equations and diagrams. "Good morning," he began, proud that his voice didn't shake. "Today I will present our findings on quantum tunneling and its potential applications in energy transfer." He was 3 minutes into his explanation when he heard it. A clear, musical laugh from the front row. Era was covering her mouth with one elegant blue hand, her shoulders shaking with barely contained amusement. "Is something funny, Ambassador?" He-jun asked, his cheeks burning. "Oh, my dear boy," Era said, standing up. Her voice was kind, but her eyes sparkled with superiority. "Your mathematics is, how should I put this, charmingly primitive. You're treating quantum tunneling like a simple transfer of energy when it's so much more complex." The room fell silent. He-jun could feel hundreds of eyes on him, human and alien alike. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "you could explain where our calculations are wrong." Era glided to the stage, her robes shimming with each movement. She waved her hand, and new equations appeared in the air, complex formations that made He-jun's head spin. "You see," she said, "your species is still thinking in terms of simple particle physics. You haven't even begun to consider the role of quantum entanglement across dimensional barriers." More laughter rippled through the Lyrian delegation. He-jun stood frozen, watching as Era began to explain concepts that made his years of research seem like a child's homework. But as she spoke, something caught his attention. There, in the corner of one of her equations, was a symbol that didn't quite fit. He squinted, trying to understand why it bothered him. "Thank you, Ambassador," he said when she finished. Your insights are illuminating. He gathered his notes, his mind racing. That symbol, that tiny discrepancy, it nagged at him like a loose tooth. As he left the stage, he heard Era speaking to her colleagues. They're doing quite well, considering how young their civilization is. Give them another few centuries, and they might begin to grasp the basics. More laughter followed him back to his seat. Jia squeezed his hand sympathetically, but He-jun barely noticed. He was already scribbling in his notebook, trying to understand what his instincts were telling him about that equation. The rest of the conference passed in a blur. When evening came, He-jun declined Jaya's invitation to join the welcome dinner for the alien delegates. I need to check something, he told her, heading for his small office in the research wing. It's probably nothing. But you've got that look, Jaya finished, smiling. The one you get when you're about to discover something important. He-jun worked through the night, filling whiteboard after whiteboard with calculations. The cleaning staff came and went, giving him curious looks as he muttered to himself and paced between equations. At 3:47 a.m., he stepped back and stared at his work. His heart was pounding. If he was right, if that tiny discrepancy meant what he thought it meant. He grabbed his phone and called Jida. She answered on the first ring, sounding wide awake. Jia, he said, his voice trembling with excitement. I need you to check my math. I think the Lyrians made a mistake. A big one. And they don't even know it. The sun was rising over Seoul, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In his office, surrounded by equations that could change everything, He-jun finally allowed himself to smile. Maybe being laughed at wasn't such a bad thing after all. Especially when you might have the last laugh. Tomorrow would be interesting. Very interesting indeed. Morning sunlight streamed through the office windows as Jaya checked He-jun's calculations for the third time. Empty coffee cups littered the desk between them. Neither had slept, but excitement kept them wide awake. This is amazing, Jaya said, tapping the whiteboard with her marker. The Lyrians missed something so basic because they were thinking too hard. Sometimes the simple answer is the right one. He-jun nodded, running his hands through his messy hair. They're so advanced that they forgot to look at the foundation. It's like they built a beautiful house but didn't check if the ground beneath it was solid. The door opened, and both scientists jumped. Dr. Kim, their department head, walked in. His eyes widened at the sight of the whiteboard-covered walls. I heard you two have been here all night, he said, straightening his glasses. The Lyrian delegation is asking why you missed this morning's session. He-jun stood up straight. Dr. Kim, we found something important. The Lyrians made a mistake in their quantum calculations. A big one. Dr. Kim frowned. That's impossible. They're centuries ahead of us. Being ahead doesn't mean being right, Jaya said. She pointed to their equations. Look here. They assumed quantum tunneling only works with complex dimensional barriers. But He-jun proved it can happen through simple space too. They overcomplicated everything. Dr. Kim studied the calculations. His eyes grew wider and wider. Finally, he stepped back and took a deep breath. You realize what will happen if you're wrong about this? He asked. You'll embarrass not just yourself, but all of Earth's scientific community. He-jun looked at his equations one more time. The numbers were clear. The math was solid. Sometimes the universe was simpler than people thought it was. I'm not wrong, he said quietly, and I need to tell them. The main conference hall was packed when they arrived. Ambassador Era was on stage, explaining advanced Lyrian theories about space travel. Her blue skin glowed under the lights as her hands moved gracefully through the air, creating complex holographic models. As you can see, she was saying, quantum tunneling through dimensional barriers is the only way to achieve faster than light travel. Your scientists will understand this, eventually. He-jun walked down the center aisle. His heart was pounding, but his steps were steady. Jia followed close behind. carrying their data tablets. "Ambassador Era," he called out. His voice was stronger than he expected. "I need to show you something." Era turned, her silver eyes finding him in the crowd. "Ah, the young scientist from yesterday. Have you come to learn more about proper quantum mechanics?" There was that laugh again, musical and slightly mocking. But this time, He-jun smiled back. "Actually," he said, "I think you need to learn something from us." The room went silent. Even the other Lyrians stopped their quiet conversations to stare at him. He-jun connected his tablet to the hall's display system. His equations appeared in the air, simple and clear. "Yesterday, you showed us your method of quantum tunneling," he began. "It was impressive, advanced, beautiful, even, but it was also wrong." Era's smile disappeared. "Excuse me. You've been looking so hard for complex solutions that you missed the simple one. Quantum tunneling doesn't need dimensional barriers. Look at these calculations." He began to explain, using the simplest words he could find. He showed how particles could tunnel through normal space using much less energy than the Lyrian method. With each word, Era's face changed from amusement to confusion to something that looked almost like fear. "This is nonsense," she said, but her voice wavered. "Our calculations have worked for centuries." "They worked," Jaya spoke up, "but not as well as they could have. Your ships use massive amounts of energy to create dimensional tunnels. Our method would use 1/10 of that energy." Other Lyrian scientists had gathered around the stage now. They were checking He-jun's math on their own devices, whispering to each other in their musical language. One of them, an older Lyrian with pale blue skin, stepped forward. "Ambassador Era, he appears to be correct. We never considered such a simple solution because we thought it was impossible." "Impossible?" He-jun shook his head. "Or did you just think it was too primitive to try?" Era stood very still, her silver eyes fixed on the equations floating in the air. The laughter from yesterday was gone, replaced by an intense focus that made her seem to glow even brighter. "How did you see it?" she asked finally. "How did you find what we missed for so long?" He-jun thought about it. "Maybe because we're still learning. We don't know enough to assume things are impossible. We just try everything, even the simple things." The room burst into excited discussion. Human and Lyrian scientists gathered around the displays, pointing and talking rapidly. Jaya was already deep in conversation with 2 Lyrian physicists, explaining the details of their discovery. But He-jun kept watching Era. The alien woman stood alone on the stage, still staring at his equations. Her hands moved slowly through the air, tracing the path of his calculations. Finally, she turned to him. Her expression was different now. No more mockery, no more superiority. Instead, there was something that looked almost like respect. "It seems," she said softly, "that we have much to learn from each other." He-jun nodded. "Everyone does. That's what makes science beautiful, isn't it? There's always something new to discover, even in the simplest things." As the excitement in the hall grew, He-jun felt a strange peace settle over him. Yesterday's laughter didn't matter anymore. He had proven himself not by fighting or arguing, but by doing what scientists do best, looking at the universe with fresh eyes and an open mind. Dr. Kim appeared beside him, beaming with pride. "The Lyrian Science Council wants to meet with you immediately," he said. "They have questions." He-jun looked at Jia, who gave him a thumbs up as she continued her discussion with the Lyrian scientists. Then he looked at Ara, who was now examining his equations with intense concentration. "Tell them I'm ready," he said. "We have a lot to talk about." The sun was high in the sky now, shining through the conference hall's windows. Its light caught the shimmer of Lyrian skin and the gleam of human eyes alike, all focused on the simple equations that had changed everything. Sometimes, He-jun thought, the biggest discoveries come from the smallest moments of clarity. The Lyrian Science Council chamber was nothing like He-jun had imagined. Instead of the cold, metallic room he expected, He found himself in a space that felt like a mix between a garden and a library. Living plants with strange blue leaves grew along the walls, and soft light came from floating orbs that drifted near the ceiling. 7 Lyrian council members sat in a half-circle before him. Their skin colors ranged from pale morning sky blue to deep ocean blue. Ambassador Era stood to one side, her expression unreadable. Hajun of Earth, the eldest council member, spoke, his voice deep and gentle. "Show us your discovery again. Show us what we missed." Hajun looked at the holographic display they had provided. It was much more advanced than Earth technology, responding to his thoughts as much as his movements. He began to explain his theory again, starting with the basics. "Think of quantum tunneling like crossing a river," he said. "The Lyrian method builds an entire bridge with complex materials. But sometimes you can just find a narrow spot and jump across." Jaya, who stood beside him, added her own diagrams to the display. "We tested this theory in our lab. It works with even the smallest amount of energy. The particles don't need a dimensional tunnel. They just need the right push." One of the council members, a female Lyrian with silvery markings on her face, leaned forward. "But our calculations showed this was impossible. The energy requirements were based on an incorrect assumption." Hajun finished politely. "You assumed particles needed a complete pathway. But in quantum mechanics, sometimes the shortest path is through what looks like no path at all." The council chamber filled with quiet discussion. Hajun watched as the Lyrians spoke to each other in their musical language, their hands moving in graceful gestures that seemed to be part of their speech. Era stepped forward suddenly. "Council members, I have replicated these results." Her voice was clear and strong. "I spent all night testing their theory. It works. It works better than our method has worked for the past 300 years. The council fell silent. The eldest member stood slowly, his robes shimmering in the soft light. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked Hajun. "This discovery doesn't just change how we think about quantum tunneling. It changes everything we thought we knew about space travel." Hajun nodded. "That's why we brought more data." He gestured to Jada, who opened another set of files on the display. "We've already calculated how this could improve your ship's efficiency. They could travel faster and use less energy." The next few hours passed in a blur of questions, explanations, and demonstrations. Hajun and Jaya showed their calculations again and again, answering every question with patience and clarity. With each explanation, the Lyrians' expressions changed from doubt to understanding to excitement. As the sun began to set outside, casting orange light through the chamber's crystal windows, the council called for a break. Hajun found himself standing near a window, looking out at the Seoul skyline. Era approached him quietly. "I owe you an apology," she said, her silver eyes reflecting the sunset. "I laughed at you because I thought I knew everything there was to know about quantum mechanics. I was wrong." Hajun smiled. "Science isn't about knowing everything. It's about being willing to learn new things. Your species is young," Era continued, "but perhaps that is your strength. You see things with fresh eyes. You ask questions we stopped asking long ago." Before Hajun could respond, the council members returned to their seats. The eldest raised his hand for silence. "We have reached a decision," he announced. "This discovery is too important to ignore. We propose a joint research project between Earth and Lyrian scientists. We will share our knowledge of dimensional physics, and you will share your unique perspective." Jaya grabbed Hajun's arm in excitement. This was more than they had ever hoped for. Access to Lyrian science, a chance to learn from their centuries of knowledge. But the council wasn't finished. The elder turned to Era. "Ambassador, you will lead this project. Your experience with both our peoples makes you the ideal choice. That is, if you can work with the humans who proved you wrong." Era's face broke into a genuine smile, the first Hajun had seen from her. "It would be my honor. Perhaps they can teach me to laugh at myself, as well as at others." The chamber filled with gentle laughter, but this time it was different. This wasn't the mocking laughter of superiority. It was the warm laughter of people, human and alien alike, sharing a moment of understanding. As they left the council chamber, Jaya was already making plans. We'll need to expand our lab, and we should start learning the Lyrian language. And, one step at a time, Heijun said, but he was smiling too. He looked back at Ara, who was speaking with the council members. She caught his eye and nodded respectfully. Outside, the Seoul evening was cool and clear. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Heijun looked up at them, thinking about how much closer humanity had just come to understanding their mysteries. You know what's funny? Jaya said as they walked toward their lab. All of this happened because someone laughed at you. Heijun thought about the past 2 days, the humiliation that had turned to triumph, the mockery that had led to understanding. Sometimes, he said, the best thing that can happen is for someone to underestimate you. It gives you a chance to prove them wrong. Above them, one of the stars moved, a Lyrian ship catching the last rays of the setting sun. Soon, those ships would be faster and more efficient, thanks to a simple idea from a young species that didn't know what was impossible. The future was about to become very interesting indeed. 3 months had passed since the discovery that changed everything. The Seoul International Science Center had transformed into a hub of human-Lyrian cooperation. The once quiet halls now buzzed with conversations in both Korean and the musical Lyrian language. Heijun sat in his new office, much larger than his old one, looking at the holographic displays that filled the air around him. Jaya was working at her desk nearby, her fingers dancing through the air as she manipulated the Lyrian technology they had all learned to use. The latest test results are amazing, Jaya said, pulling up a new set of data. The modified ships are using 40% less energy than before. The Lyrian engineers can hardly believe it. Heijun nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. Earlier that morning, Ambassador Era had asked to meet with him privately. After 3 months of working together, they had become something close to friends, but her message had seemed unusually formal. A soft chime announced Era's arrival. She entered the office, her deep blue skin seeming to shimmer more than usual. Heijun had learned this was a sign of excitement in Lyrians. Heijun, she said, settling into a chair that adjusted itself to her tall frame. I have something important to discuss with you. Jaya started to leave, but Era held up a hand. Please stay, Jaya. This concerns you as well. Heijun noticed that Era no longer spoke with the superior tone she had used during their first meeting. Now her voice carried respect and warmth. The Lyrian Science Council has been watching your work closely, Era began. Not just the quantum tunneling breakthrough, but everything that followed. The way you approach problems, it's different from how we think. And we believe that difference is valuable. She waved her hand, and a new hologram appeared in the center of the room. It showed a massive space station orbiting a distant star. This is the Lyrian Central Science Academy, Era continued. For the first time in our history, we would like to invite Earth scientists to study there. And we want you, Heijun, to be the first. The room fell silent. Heijun stared at the rotating image of the space station, his heart pounding. This was an opportunity beyond anything he had ever imagined. Me? He finally managed to say. But I'm still so new to all of this. Surely there are more experienced scientists. Era smiled, and this time there wasn't a trace of mockery in it. Experience isn't what we need. We need fresh eyes, new perspectives, the ability to see simple solutions where we see only complexity. You have shown us that sometimes the youngest can teach the oldest. Jaya jumped up from her chair. Heijun, this is amazing. You have to accept. But Heijun hesitated. What about our work here? The joint research project. I would be going with you, Era explained. And Jaya, we have a place for you as well, if you want it. The Academy has already approved positions for both of you. Heijun looked around his office, at the city beyond his window. at the life he had built here. Then he looked at the hologram of the space station again. He thought about all the mysteries still waiting to be solved, all the simple solutions hiding behind complex problems. "How long would we be there?" he asked. "A standard academy term is 2 Earth years," Era said. "But this isn't just about studying. We want you to teach as well, to show our scientists how to think differently." Jaya was practically bouncing with excitement. 2 years in space, learning alien science. "Hejun, we have to do this." Hejun stood up and walked to the window. Below he could see the spot where, just 3 months ago, he had stood feeling humiliated after being laughed at by an alien scientist. Now that same scientist was offering him a chance to learn secrets of the universe that humanity had only dreamed about. "You know what's strange?" he said, turning back to Era. "If you hadn't laughed at me that day, none of this would have happened. I might never have looked so closely at your equations." Era's skin flickered with colors, her species' version of a blush. Perhaps the universe has a sense of humor after all. Sometimes we must learn to laugh at ourselves before we can learn anything else. Hejun looked at Jaya, who nodded encouragingly. Then he looked at the hologram one more time. The space station spun slowly, promising adventures and discoveries beyond imagination. "When do we leave?" he asked. Era's face lit up. "In 1 month. There's much to prepare. You'll need to learn basic Lyrian language, understand our safety protocols, prepare for space travel." As Era listed all the preparations, Hejun felt a strange calm settle over him. 3 months ago, he had been a young scientist trying to prove himself. Now he was about to become one of the first humans to study at an alien science academy. "Oh," Jia suddenly exclaimed. "We should tell Dr. Kim. He'll never believe this." "I think he will," Hejun said, smiling. "After everything that's happened, I think people are starting to believe that anything is possible." The afternoon sun streamed through the window, catching the hologram and making it sparkle like a dream coming true. Outside, the world went about its business, unaware that 2 of its scientists were about to embark on humanity's greatest academic adventure. Era stood and held out her hand, a human gesture she had learned. "Welcome to the next chapter of your journey, Hejun and Jida. I think we're all going to learn a lot from each other." As Hejun shook her hand, he couldn't help but smile at how far they had come from that first meeting. From laughter to respect, from mockery to friendship, from Earth to the stars. Sometimes the best journeys begin with someone underestimating you. And sometimes, just sometimes, being laughed at is the first step toward touching the stars.